Good morning everybody, this is Pawan and today I am back with one more interesting video. And in this video we are going to talk about one of the most interesting story, and that story is about the discovery of the structure of DNA. Yes, we all know that the DNA was discovered, or the structure of DNA was discovered by two most important scientists, that is James Watson and Francis Crick. You might all be wondering, if they discovered the DNA, why have I written photograph 51? What is the significance of this photograph 51? For this to know, you have to be with me till the end of the video. And just for your kind information, let me tell you, this photograph 51 is also referred to as the secret to life. Why exactly? I will let you know at the end of the video. Yes, so be with me. So yes, let's go back. So James Watson and Francis Crick were the one who discovered the structure of DNA, who unveiled the structure of DNA that we see these days as this shape, and they gave it a name as the double helix. Double helix. So this was their discovery. But according to me, the journey is more beautiful than the discovery itself. So I'll take you on this journey, so be with me. So the story does not start with them. I'm going to start with the story with one more famous scientist whose name is Rosalind Franklin. Yes, Rosalind Franklin. You might have not heard her name. So this is Rosalind Franklin. Why she? When I am saying that she is not even, her name is not even present in the discovery of the structure of DNA. Only James Watson and Francis Crick. So why Rosalind Franklin? What is so special about her? So Rosalind Franklin, first of all, she is a woman and she was a chemist. She was gifted with curiosity for science. She was really curious. She just wanted to know things. She just wanted to do a greater good for the society. So she worked in various scientific fields. She worked on coals, she worked on carbons, she even determined the structure of coals. So she had a very great contributions in many fields, but she was known, or she was most proficient in one specific technique which was called as X-ray diffraction. X-ray diffraction. So this is a technique in which she was really proficient, and this particular skill of her was going to make a history, which I'll let you know. Fine. So what was so special about this technique? What did this technique do? So she basically, she worked at Randalls Lab in King's College, London. So in this lab, she was awarded a scholarship. She got a grant and she started working at this particular lab. And in this lab, Randall basically gave her a graduate student to work with. So during her work, she was working on the structure of DNA. How exactly? What aspect of the structure of DNA? So she was given a task to do crystallographic studies. Crystallographic studies or X-ray diffraction studies. X-ray diffraction studies on DNA. So when she entered the lab, this was not exactly her work. So basically this work to her was given by one more guy whose name was Maurice Wilkins. Maurice Wilkins. So Maurice Wilkins was also assistant lab chief of Randalls Lab. So Maurice Wilkins recommended Randalls to give this DNA study to Rosalind Franklin. Rosalind Franklin. So now basically see, this particular journey is not much about what work was done. It was much about in what environment it was done. Okay, what were the other difficulties or what were the other aspects to this discovery, which is very interesting. So here Maurice Wilkins basically was assistant in lab chief of Randalls Lab. Okay, so when Rosalind Franklin entered Randalls Lab, Morris Wilkins, knowing that Rosalind Franklin is very good in diffraction studies, he decided to let her work on this X-ray diffraction of DNA. Morris Wilkins was also working on DNA structure using X-ray diffraction studies. So he thought her expertise would be very useful in the discovery of structure of DNA. So Randall gave her this work of doing X-ray diffraction studies on DNA with a graduate student whose name was Gosling. Okay, so both of them, Franklin and Gosling, were working on the structure of DNA by taking their photograph using X-ray diffraction. So they were using X-ray diffraction studies to see how exactly the DNA looked. Okay, but there was a little misunderstanding, and that misunderstanding was Rosalind Franklin was not informed or wasn't instructed to share informations with Morris Wilkins. So this misunderstanding led to a little conflict, and that conflict was she was not comfortable sharing the data with Morris Wilkins because it was not informed to her that she had to. So this was a little bit misunderstanding. So this Rosalind Franklin and Gosling, they later on went on to work on this DNA structure using this X-ray diffraction, and eventually they took one of the most legendary photographs which led to the discovery of the structure of DNA, and that photograph is called as photograph 51. So this is photograph 51. But as we know, the DNA is like this, but this structure is nowhere near the structure we know today. So this X-ray diffraction needed to be studied. It needed to be studied. It needed to be interpreted. So Rosalind Franklin and Gosling basically tried to work out what exactly this structure meant. They tried to work out how exactly was the DNA looking at this image. This is a very detailed image the scientists have got through X-ray diffraction studies. So let's stop the story over here. So Rosalind Franklin took this photograph 51. 51. Why exactly 51? Because this was the 51st photo during their experiment. So that is why the name was given as photo 51. Okay, so now let's stop the story over here. That Rosalind Franklin took this photo, Rosalind Franklin and Gosling's X-ray diffraction photo of B-DNA. So it's a B-DNA. So basically she had two photographs of A-DNA and B-DNA. So she worked mostly on this B-DNA. Okay, fine. So now let's stop the story over that she took the photo. Now there is a parallel story going on. So there is one more parallel story going on, and this parallel story is she was working at King's College London, and two more scientists, that is James Watson and Crick. They were also working on this DNA structure, but they were working on theoretical model. So they had a theoretical model on the structure of DNA. So once what happened, Morris Wilkins, this guy, Morris Wilkins, he shared the photograph of Rosalind Franklin with Francis and Crick. So this photograph 51 that you see, this photograph was shared with Francis and Crick. It is said that it was without the knowledge of Rosalind Franklin. And after looking at this photo, they got insights on how exactly the DNA looked. So basically, Rosalind Franklin also interpreted this particular image, but she was just 2 steps away. From the discovery. So this statement is not what I am saying. This statement is what Crick. Crick says, he says that she was just 2 steps away from discovering the DNA. So because James Watson and Crick were already working on theoretical model of DNA, when they looked at this structure, they got a really good insight on how exactly this could have been. So they worked on this for weeks. So they tried to interpret this. They had discussions with Maurice Wilkins, Gosling, and with themselves, and then later they came up with a model and they published the data. Fine, this was a discovery, this was for a greater good. They published the data, it's okay. But in that publication they nowhere mentioned that this data which they have got, the discovery which they have made, it had a very major contribution from the photo they received from Rosalind Franklin. So basically they completely undermined the contributions of Rosalind Franklin. If it wasn't for this photo, they might have not, or it was very unlikely for them to discover the structure of DNA, or it might have been impossible. This is not what I am saying. This is what one of them have said. Look at this. The formulation of the structure would have been most unlikely if not possible. They have acknowledged without Franklin's data. So basically this is the statement what they have said in their later publications or their later data that was presented to Nature, that it was not possible without the data from Franklin's to actually conclude what kind of a structure the DNA had. So Rosalind Franklin was one of the very crucial, very crucial candidate or scientist in discovering the structure of DNA, but her work was never recognized by Francis and Crick, at least by, sorry, not Francis, Watson, James Watson and Francis Crick. Even them, they did not mention her contribution. But this photograph was shown to Francis and Watson and Crick during the time when she was shifting the lab. She was shifting the lab, okay, and this was happening during the same time. So they went on to publish the data. They nowhere mentioned her contributions, but later they admitted that they looked at her work. They looked at her work which is submitted, which was not published actually, which was submitted to medical council, medical research council, and some of the person in medical research council basically showed that data to Francis and James Watson and Francis Crick. So from the notes or from the structure or from the photo from which Rosalind Franklin took, had a very great role in playing to discover the structure of DNA. So what is the moral of the story? What is the moral of the story? Fine, the Rosalind Franklin had a major contribution. Watson and Crick, basically they discovered, they misleaded everyone that they are the one who discovered the structure of DNA. That is true. They discovered, they interpreted the structure of DNA. That is true. They are very great scientists, but they denied the contribution of Rosalind Franklin. But later, eventually, the work of Rosalind Franklin uncovered. But sadly, in 1962, when the Nobel Award was given, it was given to James Watson, Francis Crick and Maurice Wilkins. So Rosalind Franklin was not involved in that Nobel Prize. And the more sad story is she was not even alive at that time. So she died because of cancer in around 1958. She was born in 1920 and she died in 1958. So she was around 37 years old when she died. So what is the whole moral of the story? She was not even present, to be considered for the Nobel Prize. So what is the moral of the story? Kya hai? What is the moral of the story? So the moral of the story is here. If you are working for a greater good, you should not crave for attention. That is what we have learned from Rosalind Franklin. So Rosalind Franklin never rebelled about her recognition in the DNA contribution. She never rebelled. So this is what we have to learn from Rosalind Franklin. When you are doing something for greater good, Do it out of humility. Do it out of curiosity, not because you want to crave attention. Eventually, when it's time to defend you, the world and your work will come for your defense. Eventually, the history will remember you. And even if no one remembers, there is someone who is looking at your work. So, work for a greater good without craving attention. That is what we learn from the story of Rosalind Franklin, James Watson, Francis Crick, and Maurice Wilkins. So, this is all for today, and we will look forward for another video, another interesting video when we meet next time. Until then, bye bye.